Materialism. Typically, materialism, that whole philosophy of materialism is tied to physics and matter and the hard stuff and it's realism and scientific and all of those things. Right? So that's our definition of materialism that we'll work with in this model here. And where did it come from? It came from the early Greek philosophers that wanted to find the stuff that underlies everything. They wanted to find out what is this made from and that made from, what is underneath everything. Right? And they experimented with all kinds of elements. They said, air is it. Everybody needs air. Air is in everything. And all the lists that they wrote rings pretty true. But then somebody else said, oh, it's fire. Fire is in everything. It's that energy that pushes you forward. And he made a really good argument for fire and for earth and for water and for all of these different elements. But they were trying to get to that one thing and obviously didn't find it. And then Descartes happened, and Descartes was a very wonderful man and did great good for science. And we wouldn't be standing here right now with all this technology if it wasn't for him. Because what he did was he struck a deal with this church. He said, let me go cut up corpses and play with people and that stuff and that body piece, and the soul is yours. I won't touch the soul. All right? The soul goes to religion, and you guys deal with that, and I'll just deal with the material stuff, the body. And the church said, cool, that's cool, you know, we can handle that. And just as a really quick side note, Descartes thought that the soul was located in the pineal gland. And we'll talk a little bit about the occult stuff. Oh, I didn't want to do it. Occult stuff in a second. But, so he completely separated those two domains and said, here's matter, and I'm only going to deal with materialism, and you guys deal with the other stuff. Right? What happened with that is, you know, and as a result of it, we have these 5 sort of characteristics of materialism. The very first one is a strong objectivity. What that means is to say, my mind is separate from these objects. Every single object in this room is its own object. It's a finite piece. It's a separate piece. It's not tied to my mind at all. My mind has nothing to do with it. Right? So that's objectivity. There's an objective universe out there. If I died, everything would still be kind of the same thing, and it's objectively there. Second point is causal determination. You've all heard probably of that idea of the billiard ball universe, where like one thing hits another thing, hits another thing, hits another thing, hits another thing, and you have this little chain. Right? So materialism says these are all little ping pong balls, billiard balls, whatever, but hitting against each other, and there's specific laws and Newtonian physics around that where we can figure out how they move each other. Third thing is locality, and Einstein actually put that into his 1970 theory of relativity. It was later referred to as sort of blunder because he kind of apologized for it, but he said that every single object has to move consistently in time and space. That there's a consistent movement, it doesn't jump, it doesn't go from here to here, it just goes from one place to the next. There's locality. And obvious success is obvious, you know, as I said, Descartes, you know, had that whole idea of, you know, split materialism off, and then science evolves really rapidly. You start having machines and whole world machines at Versailles, and you get this idea of a world machine and building machines and science was so accelerated. And, you know, science, again, in prisonized form, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but, you know, all the scientific endeavors led to, you know, really great discoveries. And as a result of it, people started saying, you know, everything is matter. That's what we have with physical or material monism. What that means is that they assume that everything has matter underlying it, period. And then the last thing is that idea of an epiphenomenalism. What that means is that they say that the brain essentially is this complex electric machine, and at some point it got complex enough so that there's this weird feedback loops, and that's why you have consciousness. So there's a consciousness was born out of this physical brain. Now, you know, there's a quick, lovely quote by Houston Smith around how men became so excited about science that they at some point assumed that everything must fall into the domains of what science uses, ultimately the number. And people forget that mathematics, mathematics is not truth. Mathematics is a language to describe objects. I just started with the first man who said, ooh, I'm going to count the people in this room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, go like to 10 and then 20, you know, so there's systems of 10 and 20 logically because we think that way, right? And it's only has, but that's not reality. That's my grasping, my models, my symbols for reality. And that's a little bit what happened with materialism. And there's a couple of things with materialism that really don't work too well. I mentioned that monism thing where it says everything is made from matter. And in a way it denies consciousness as a separate piece. It says here's matter and there's only matter, and if it gets complicated enough and something pops up and there's something consciously thingy, but they're essentially separated. The second is that there's proof of non-local phenomena. Non-local phenomena, starting with Alan Aspect's famous experiment where he had two little particles and they were related and then they separated, and he essentially proved that even if particles are distant over billions of light years, if they've ever come across each other and they have a connection with each other, one changing will affect the other one. And it will change it without having to send a message saying, hey, by the way, I'm changing. Right? That's why we have this electromagnetic chauvinism that we have in our society, where we think that if I want to send something from here to here, I actually have to have something running there. I have to have one of those cables. Right? Where in quantum physics, there's experiments that prove non-locality, meaning that by measuring something in state A, in point A, and measuring something in point B, if those elements are correlated in some way, I don't need to send anything across. I can just, by pure measurement, send, in quotation marks, a message, right? So there's experiments of that. Jan actually mentioned here, I did. Jan has a whole big piece of phenomena that he collected. And then there's also the very famous study by Grinberg and Zilberbaum. What they did was they took two meditators and they said, put them in the same room, and they said, concentrate on each other. Right? Focus on establishing a bridge in your meditation. So they did for a little while. And then they took those two meditators and put them in two separate rooms. Not just two completely separate rooms, but they were, of course, audio-proof, visually proof, and they put them inside of Faraday cages. Now, a Faraday cage is a concoction that essentially is a big cage, similar to a bird cage, and what it does is it will filter out any sort of electromagnetic radiation field signal coming in. So no radio signals, no radio waves, no telephone, blah, 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 blah. Can go through there. So between these two meditators in these two separate rooms, and then they said, continue to focus on each other. And then they took one of them and they showed them a strobe light at various frequencies. Right? And watching a strobe light will actually have something in your brain that's called an evoked potential. You'll be able to measure the frequencies of your eyes signaling to the brain that you're seeing this light. Right? There's a very distinct frequency and a very distinct pattern. So they did that with one of the meditators, and then they put an EEG on the other meditator, and funny enough, he had a transfer potential, meaning that in his brain, too, that strobe light was registering, right? Which means that somehow they transferred this consciousness, they're correlating consciousness, establishing for the meditation some sort of bridge. Right? So there's no local phenomena. The other thing, as I already mentioned, epiphenomena is a big problem. The whole idea of emergence. How can, if everything is completely objective, if everything, there's only an objective universe, how can subjective experience, like yours and yours and yours and mine, how can subjective experience be? And materialism, any sort of materialist philosophy has so far completely failed to explain that. They keep saying, one day we'll figure out what makes it happen. But that's it, there's no, until then they're going to leave it conveniently by the side as much as possible. The other thing is that whole causality principle. If everything is indeed billiard balls, and there's little balls hitting this and little balls hitting that, then everything is already predetermined. Every thought that you're having right now, the fact that I'm speaking right now, is because somebody threw away a Coke can last year in Disney World. And because that Coke can pushed some particle over, pushed something over, pushed something over, pushed something over, I am now here talking. But I'm actually not even here. That's the last part. It denies my subjectivity. My subjective experience of this reality is bullshit. I'm just imagining that. My brain just imagines that. My brain happens to be complicated enough that I'm thinking that I'm here, so now I'm experiencing this because certain billiard balls are falling. So it doesn't really ring too true, right? And the other thing is about the meaning of life. What does materialism offer you? It says that at some point you die, and your brain is dead, and all mental activity stops, all your memories go away because your brain now slightly decomposes, everything is gone, you're gone, period, right? Now, side of the fact is, for example, Dr. Stevenson has a whole database of over 2,500 cases of kids with past life experiences, and 2,000 something cases that were proven and verified, meaning that those kids found hidden objects, they knew names of relatives that they couldn't have possibly known, they knew places, etc., etc. So obviously, something's not quite right there, right? So, but it says, essentially that, everything changes, and the best thing you can do is have a jolly good time, right? So essentially it says, there's no meaning to life, outside of eat, drink, be merry, which is a lot of fun and, nothing, not to be neglected, but seems like it's not quite all of it. Right? It's true. Yeah, there you go. It is true, that's a funny thing, there's multiple truths, and there's another multiple truths, you really get into that when you talk about spiritualism.